our panel. And we are taking a live look, by the way, on where she will be speaking. May Mailman, Republican strategist and former White House associate counsel under Trump. Nayyera Haq, former State Department advisor under Obama. And to keep things balanced, Paul Rieckhoff is going to join me in a moment. He's host of the Independent Americans podcast and founder and CEO of Independent Veterans of America. Great to see all of you. Nayyera, I will start with you. Let's start with the latest Monmouth polling. Vice President Harris trailing slightly on both the economy and immigration among registered voters in Pennsylvania. I have to ask, our viewers are seeing the numbers. What does she need to say today in just a few minutes to help close this gap?
I think the polling is a little bit behind what we've seen coming out of her previous economic speeches and just, frankly, the reintroduction of her to the American public, not as somebody else's vice president, but as a leader in her own right. And we can see that there's a lot of enthusiasm and support for that. Part of what she has been trying to do is talk about an opportunity for the middle class and future forward, right? Those are the three things you will probably hear consistently from her. But she hasn't given up the populist mantle to Donald Trump, right? She was talking about how it's hard to afford a home with down payments right now for millennials and anybody under the age of 50 who's trying to do this for the first time. So talking about what those cash payments could look like, the idea of gas prices. Everyone always complains to the president about gas prices. And so there is a way to investigate potential collusion between oil and gas companies. All of these are kitchen table pocketbook issues that are in sharp contrast to what I just heard President Trump talk about, which was currency exchange rates.
Right. Paul, I want to hear your thoughts. What can Harris do to maybe close that gap that we're seeing in the swing state of Pennsylvania?
I think she's got to do two things. Number one, she's got to admit that things aren't easy for most people. You've heard from the Biden administration kind of sprinkling sunshine, saying inflation's down, but real working class people, and especially independents, are feeling a crunch. So she's got to understand and communicate that she understands their pain. Number two, how about saying you're going to lower taxes? You want something that's going to appeal to everybody, and especially independents? Propose something that would actually lower taxes for working class people. I think those are two ways that she could start to break through and chip away at what is right now an edge for the Republicans on the economy.
All right, Trump did talk about the economy, like both of you mentioned. Let's take a listen to a snippet of it, and I'll talk to you guys on the other side.
I will give you the lowest taxes, the lowest energy costs. I will cut your energy in half. The lowest regulatory burden and free access to the best and biggest market on the planet Earth. But only if you make your product here in America and hire American workers for the job.
So he did mention lowering taxes, like Paul just mentioned. But May, we didn't get much detail from Trump. With that said, we don't know much from Harris yet either. Hopefully that'll change in the next hour or so. But for Trump, how feasible are those plans that he just mentioned?
I think they're feasible because I think we've seen them. So that's really the difference here is Kamala Harris can't answer the question with a yes of are you better now than you were 4 years ago? She's been asked now twice before the National Association of Black Journalists and during the debate. And she starts talking about COVID lockdowns. So what Trump is just saying is that this is going to be the economy that I had, where you did have lower regulations, where you did have a much friendlier energy policy. And when you talk about inflation, what goes into the cost of every single good? What goes into the cost of every single home, whether you're in an apartment or a house? It is energy costs. And I don't think that there's a real comparison about which administration is going to be friendlier to affordable energy.
Nayyera, I want to ask about this open letter since we are talking about the economy. It's from 400 economists and policy experts. They've openly endorsed Harris. They say Trump's policies will reignite inflation. It'll threaten America's global standing. If that's the case, why do voters in poll after poll still trust Trump more on the economy than his opponent?
Well, because Trump has been more targeted and effective in how he has messaged the economy than Biden was for, the first 3 years. And it's part of the reason why Biden's no longer running for president at the top of the ticket was the realization that there's a massive disconnect on multiple levels. To that point, though, the job of governing isn't great messaging. The job of governing is getting the economy and the fundamentals right. So when you hear economists in the administration right now talking about the fundamentals like the consumer price index or how inflation is going down, they are not wrong. It's just not being felt in ways by the American public. I mean, I'm certainly paying more for groceries and the bajillion apples my kids eat each week. I understand that. So the idea of having a candidate now leading Democrats who can speak with heart to these middle-class pocketbook issues, I think draws a big contrast between where Trump is. And even Trump's economy message is not about feeling your pain. It's about regulation. It's about open markets. Those are corporate messages, not kitchen table issues.
I think what the three of you are agreeing on is us, the American voter, want to see something tangible, and we're not seeing that yet. Paul, let's talk about another poll. It shows Harris and Trump neck and neck with independent voters. Let's show those numbers to our viewers. Harris at 45, Trump at 41. What should either of them do to close the deal with those so important independents this election cycle?
I think the reality is they have to acknowledge that most voters don't like either one of them. Right?
True.
And really, they're picking between the lesser of two evils, especially independents. 51% of the country is independents. There's a higher number in Pennsylvania now because they can register the DMV, and young people are opting in as independents and unaffiliated. So I think they've really got to level with people and say, hey, I might not be your best choice, but I'm better than that guy or that gal. And I think that's how they're going to cut through, is cutting through the partisan spin and talking real talk, and recognize that most voters don't like either one of them. And they're picking between the lesser of two evils. And on economic issues, stability is important. I think that's an opportunity for Harris to differentiate herself. She can say, look, he's more chaotic than I am, and I'm going to bring some stability. If she can communicate that, she'll make headway in areas that she's really struggling in right now in Pennsylvania, especially with men. Working class, uneducated white men, she's struggling there right now, and that's why she's in Pennsylvania.
We're talking about Pennsylvania. May Harris is slightly ahead in 4 of those 7 critical battleground states. These are the polling averages from our partners at Decision Desk HQ. Trump says he's not doing another debate. So how does he shift the momentum here, considering Harris may have gotten the last word?
So I think that he has shifted the momentum. So you saw Kamala Harris get a huge bump in favorability right after she replaced Joe Biden. I think that that actually was Democrats and people saying, thank goodness that Joe Biden is no longer running for president. But you didn't see a bump after the debate. There was supposed to be one. 70% of people who watched the debate said that she did a good job, but you really didn't see that translate to a bump, which I think means the momentum is all built in, and that's done now. So what's she going to do to close the gap, as you said, for those, small number of independent voters? She's out of tools. I mean, she's not doing interviews. She's not going to places where those independent voters are. She's continuing to do rallies. Well, those people were already going to vote for you. Those were people who were actually going to vote for Joe Biden. So I think that a debate actually is not really going to help her, whether there is or isn't one. She needs to figure out how to reach people who are not watching mainstream media. It has to be people who are living their lives watching the NFL or something else.
Naira, your thoughts here?
I do agree. It's about local politics and going local. And some of what has been confusing, I think, to outsiders is why is Kamala Harris going to areas where Trump had won in the past? And some of it is that lingering anxiety that people have about another Trump administration, that idea of chaos, erraticism, all of that. And so even if she gets people in those counties to not vote for Trump, that ends up being a win for the Harris campaign, because that idea that there are actually undecided voters, I don't think that truly exists. People have strong opinions. It's all about, are you going to be able to get enough people that you need out to vote? So taking the challenge to Trump territories and feeding doubt there could be effective for her in picking up the states she needs.
And she's in Pittsburgh right now. One last thing for you, Paul. I want to ask you about something Trump said yesterday about Ukraine. Let's listen.
Every time Zelensky comes to the United States, he walks away with $100 billion. I think he's the greatest salesman on earth. But we're stuck in that war unless I'm president. I'll get it done. I'll get it negotiated. I'll get out. We got to get out.
We know Zelensky's here in New York for the UN. Your thoughts on what the former president had to say?
It's crazy political talk. The idea that he can wave a magic wand and end wars in Ukraine or the Middle East is politics, right? And I think this is where both of them are wrong. Both of them have kind of said, oh, I can settle things down in Ukraine, I can settle things down in Israel and Gaza, and I think that's ridiculous. And when folks who focus on national security, who focus on global instability, understand that, and that's like vintage political talk. And I think that's actually an area where he is losing independence, is on Ukraine. Ukraine is generally popular. It's not popular with him and J.D. Vance, but it tends to be popular across America with independents and even within the Republican Party. So I think he's really out of step there, and I think it's hurting him in places where there are high percentages of veterans, especially in places like Pennsylvania.
Final thoughts before we go. May, you first.
Yeah, so this race is tied. Everybody who I talk to who's on the campaign says that this race is tied. For me, it comes down to turnout. And I guess that's where I have some concerns as a Republican, is that I don't know if the culture around early voting has changed, and I don't know if the infrastructure has substantially changed. So even though I'm sort of heartened by the polls, I think the polls are actually pretty good for Republicans. My concern rests with turnout.
Sure. I think that's both sides. Naira, would you agree?
I do. It's all about, right, get out the vote. GOTV is what people talk about once you hit October. I think the underestimation of how women who may not have thought that Roe v. Wade was something they had to worry about, and how abortion has now become a family health care issue. The number of men you see talking about these challenges, I think that is an underserved and a misunderstood dynamic that at this point is going to be working in Kamala Harris's favor.
Naira Huck, May Mailman, Paul Rykoff, thank you so much. You can catch more of Paul on his podcast, Independent Americans. Thank you, guys.